The coalition between the Liberals and the Nationals is the longest political partnership in our country's history. The alliance has worked in the past because they've traditionally been aligned in their values, but every alliance can be tested, and this year some differences in the positions of the Liberals and Nationals on key issues, particularly around energy, have taken some ironing out. So, in this Squiz Shortcut, we'll take a look at the history of the coalition, how it works, and the possible challenges ahead. Squiz Shortcuts is the backstory to the big news stories. I'm Larissa Moore.
And I'm Andrew Williams.
Andrew, the relationship between the Liberals and the Nationals in the coalition has gone through a couple of rocky patches this year. There was even a brief breakup after the federal election. They got back together again that time. Recently, though, it's been quite a ride.
Yes, they've been the Ross and Rachel of federal politics, and they're back on firmer ground now after last week's decision by the Liberals to walk back from the target of net zero by 2050. That now matches up to the Nationals' policy position after they dumped it the week before. Now, if the Liberals hadn't have gone that way, there would have been a really significant division.
And it really could have spelled Splitsville again, and perhaps this time for good. That's not something either of them really want to happen, though, because divided, they're not as strong, and politics is a numbers game.
It is a numbers game. So the whole reason that the Liberals and Nationals are in a coalition really is to form a larger group in Parliament and have more numbers. If they've got greater numbers, they've got the ability to challenge the Labor Party in elections and in the Parliament more broadly.
And we're going to put some actual numbers around that. 150 seats in the lower house. For the parliament we currently have, the Labor Party holds 94 seats. The coalition holds a combined 43 seats.
Yeah, and the breakdown there is the Liberals, if we include the Liberal National Party in Queensland, that holds 34 seats, and the Nationals hold 9 seats, although some of those seats in Queensland are held by the Nationals as well. So it's sort of 28 Liberal, 15 National, to put specific numbers on it. And as you can see, standing alone, they would be a lot weaker. So it's their interest to get along. And historically, they've generally always been on a similar page.
Yeah, they have. Then they sit next to each other in the House of Reps and the Senate. They generally vote the same way. For a lot of us growing up, it's always been this way, the Libs and the Nats in this coalition. But we thought for this shortcut, we would explore a little bit how the coalition came to be formed and how the coalition agreement works.
Yeah, so it was first formed more than 80 years ago. We mentioned it's been around for a long time. Back in 1946, the National Party at the time was called the Country Party. It is the older, more established party of the two. It was set up over 100 years ago to represent the concerns of voters from rural and regional Australia. Its coalition partner, the Liberal Party, that was created in 1944 by Robert Menzies to act as a counter to the Labor Party and the union movement, and the idea was that it would represent people who are self-employed and from the middle class, so a different side to the workers traditionally represented by Labor.
Now, Menzies was the leader of the United Australia Party at the time. It was folded into the new Liberal Party. Then, as we mentioned, the Country Party and the Libs formed the coalition in the lead up to the 1946 federal election. They first won government in 1949. Menzies became Prime Minister, and the Country Party's Arthur Fadden became Deputy PM. And that's a structure that sort of has held when the coalition are in power.
Yeah, it absolutely has. And that arrangement at the time was mutually beneficial, and it remains that way on paper, although as we've talked about, it's been tricky and they've had to factor that relationship in terms of policies. So the Nats are limited to the number of seats that they generally appeal to. They're in regional areas, so they sort of need another party to go with them if they're going to have a chance at being in government or playing a role in government. And likewise, on their own, the Liberals traditionally haven't won enough seats to govern in their own right, so pooling with the Nationals, who share a similarly conservative policy platform, makes sense for everybody.
Exactly, and in this way, they capture both urban and rural voters across the country. Another advantage is, now, of course, Australia has a preferential voting system. This allows the two parties to run candidates against each other in seats without splitting the vote, and which, if the vote was split, would benefit the Labor Party.
Yeah, so in practice, voters can preference the other coalition party after their first choice. So even though you don't put the National Party first, you might put the Liberal Party first, the National Party second, and one of them will get your vote either way. And that means that their combined vote is used somewhat efficiently to win the seat. So although they work together, they still have their own structures, they elect their own leaders. And in case you were wondering, the leader of the coalition is always from the Liberal Party for the simple fact that it's bigger and it has the most seats of the two. Now, the two parties have an official coalition agreement with their stated policy platforms, and this is a fun fact that I learned working at the Squiz. After every election, the terms of that agreement are renegotiated.
And no one ever knows what is in the agreement except for the two parties. So it's often a bit of a mysterious document that gets pondered about. As we saw after the last election in May, things don't always run smoothly with this process. So up next, we're going to take a look at the ups and downs that the coalition has faced in the past and just what might lie ahead. Andrew, the Liberal National Coalition has been a force, really, in Australian politics. They've governed for nearly 2/3 of the last century when you add up all these stints in leadership. Hasn't always been a smooth marriage, though.
No, so before the Liberal Party existed, there were other coalitions between Conservative parties and the Country Party, but we're going to focus on the modern iteration of the coalition, so post-1946, between the Liberals and the Nationals. That one has split up 3 times. So the first was after the Labor Party, led by Gough Whitlam, won the 1972 federal election. The Liberal and Country parties decided not to form a combined opposition, and they operated separately for a period before they were united as a coalition for the 1974 federal election. So it was a shortish one. And then in 1987 it became a more significant breakup.
All I have is Ross and Rachel in my head. We were on a break.
Yes, yeah. It's hard. Once you start, it's hard to get out of it.
But that one in 1987 was huge news, and it came about because the Queensland National Party Premier Joe Bjelke-Petersen launched his Joe for Canberra campaign. Now, he was a popular premier up in Queensland. Thought he'd have a go at using that popularity to get into Canberra and become Prime Minister.
That did not happen. Don't know if you've heard of the Fitzgerald inquiry. It's worth looking up. It was, I'll give you the Cliff Notes. It was formed to investigate claims of corruption in the Queensland Police and state government. That was not a good look at the time for an aspiring PM, or indeed now. So Joe abandoned his ambitions and eventually resigned. Now, during 1987, the coalition had become deeply divided. It split up before the election that year. That weakened both parties, and Labor's Bob Hawke won government over the up-and-coming Liberal leader John Howard, who you may well have heard of.
Well, yes, he did eventually get in and become our second longest-serving PM after Menzies from 1996. He served until Kevin Rudd was elected, Kevin 07 in 2007, and that began the Rudd-Gillard-Rudd years. As for the coalition, it had well and truly reunited by then. It only took one election battering for them both to understand that we're stronger together.
Yeah, and then that sort of brings us to the most recent federal election. As you sort of mentioned there, that's a long period of stability that they've had ever since, but now a much more shaky partnership. So the coalition copped a hiding, particularly the Liberal Party in capital cities. The party's former leader, Peter Dutton, lost his seat. The new leader, Susan Lee, has been carrying out a review of their policies ever since. But, and this is why this is an ongoing important thing, she has been forced to placate the Nationals. They threatened to leave the partnership when she refused to fall in sync with some of their policies.
Yep, that ended in Nationals leader David Littleproud pulling his party out of the coalition for a couple of weeks before Lee agreed to the Nats policy demands. You might remember these were around nuclear energy, supermarket divestiture powers, and a future fund for regional Australia.
Yep, those are locked in my brain, having been covering them for the Squiz at the time. And the election results have got a lot to do with why it might look like the tail is wagging the dog. You might be going, well, hang on, didn't you say there were sort of, 20 high 20 seats for the Liberals and then not as many for the Nationals? But we mentioned the coalition were beaten in a landslide, but the Nationals only lost 1 seat, whereas the Libs lost 14 seats and their leader. So there's some tension there, because if they don't have the sort of bedrock of the Nats, the Liberals are looking in real trouble.
And the reason the tail is wagging the dog is because typically the National Party is smaller and it's not the majority coalition party, but they're the ones that are holding on to their seats.
Yeah.
The latest news poll results back this up. They show support for the coalition is at 24%. That's the lowest approval rating in 40 years. And low approval ratings and leaders could spell trouble for Lee.
Yeah, they generally don't mix. So that sound you can hear is a bell tolling on her leadership after 6 months in the job. Now, she's managed to hold it together. There have been some wobbles over the climate position, which they've just formalised. The Liberal Party dumped net zero by 2050. But even that doesn't look like it's going to be necessarily a salve either.
No, there are some moderate Liberal MPs who are pretty unhappy about Lee's rolling over in response to the demands of the right-wing members of the party and the Nationals by dumping net zero. Could mean more leadership troubles for Lee if the moderates withdraw their support from her.
And if we're thinking about, okay, they're over net zero potentially, but what is the next thing that might cause trouble between the two parties? A debate on immigration might be in the works next, and working out their policy position on that one. So get ready for that.
Yeah, no doubt we will be talking about the inner workings of the coalition again soon, Andrew. But for now, that is our shortcut to how the Liberal National Party coalition works. Thanks for listening to this shortcut. As with politics, it's a bit of an unfolding situation, so just stay tuned in to the Squiz Today podcast. Andrew and Alice will take you through any of the latest updates. If you have an idea for a future shortcut, we'd love to hear it. You can shoot them through to hello@thesquiz.com.au. Until next time.